Hello, and welcome back to the Weary Rascal Crime and Craft channel. Today we will be exploring the disturbing case of the massacre at the White House Farm, which is located near Tolleshunt, Darcy in Essex, England. But before we begin, if you're into Minecraft and true crime, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, if there are any cases that you'd like to see us cover on this channel, let us know in the comments section. If we decide to use your suggestion, we'll be sure to give you a shout out at the beginning of that video. Due to the nature of the material that we will be discussing in this video, viewer discretion is advised. With that said, let's dive in. Neville Bamber, a former pilot in the Royal Air Force, married June Speakman in 1949. Neville had turned to a life of farming and was also a magistrate at the Witham Magistrates Court. After getting married, Neville and June moved into the Georgian White House Farm, which is located on Pages Lane in the village of Tolleshunt, Darcy, in Essex, England. Previously, the 300 acres of farmland had belonged to June's father. According to Wikipedia, the Court of Appeal described Neville as a well-built man standing at 6 foot 4 inches tall and was in good physical health. Since they were unable to have children of their own, Neville and June had adopted Sheila and Jeremy when they were just babies. Before the adoption took place, Sheila and Jeremy shared no familial relation. In the 1950s, June was diagnosed with depression and, shortly after Sheila's adoption in 1958, was admitted to a psychiatric hospital where she was subjected to electroshock therapy at least 6 times. She was also treated by psychiatrist Hugh Ferguson in 1982. In addition to the farmhouse and 300 acres of farmland, the Bambers also owned property in London, as well as a caravan site also known as a campsite or campground. It's safe to say that the couple and their children, by extension, were doing well from a financial standpoint. Sheila and Jeremy were given a good home and private education that less financially sound people were unable to afford. June was extremely devout in her religion and was known to try to force her beliefs not only on her children, but on her grandchildren as well. This is what likely led to the poor relationship between herself and Sheila, as Sheila felt that June disapproved of her. As for June's relationship with Jeremy, it was so out of tune that Jeremy actually stopped speaking to her altogether. In 1977, Sheila married Colin Caffell. On June 22, 1979, the couple welcomed their twin sons Nicholas and Daniel Caffell into the world. Sadly, Sheila's and Colin's marriage would be short-lived as the two decided to divorce in 1980. Nevertheless, both Colin and Sheila were involved in the raising of their 2 boys, aside from the fact that the boys were placed in foster care for a short time in 1982 to 1983 due to Sheila's health problems. For several months before the date of the tragedy, Nicholas and Daniel were living mostly with their father at his home in Kilburn, North London. Sheila lived relatively close by in Maida Vale. In August of 1985, at June and Neville's request, a week-long visit for Sheila, Nicholas, and Daniel was made. This would allow the twins to visit with their grandparents before going on holiday to Norway, accompanied by Colin, the boy's father. Whereas most children would be ecstatic to see their grandparents, Daniel and Nicholas were reluctant to visit the farm. They didn't really like that June would make them pray. In fact, while on the way to the farm, they asked Colin to speak to June about this. Additionally, Daniel had become a vegetarian at this point and was worried that June would force him to eat meat. On August 4th, Colin dropped Sheila, Daniel, and Nicholas off at the White House Farm. This would be the last time that Colin would see his boys. At this point, I would like to delve a little into the background of Sheila, who was often called Bambi by her friends and loved ones. Sheila was born on July 18th of 1958. Her biological mother, who was only 18 at the time of Sheila's birth, was the daughter of a senior chaplain to the Archbishop of Canterbury. Her father insisted that she place the baby up for adoption. Sheila was then given to the Church of England Children's Society only 2 weeks after her birth. In October of 1957, she was adopted by the Bambers. Since her biological grandfather had known Neville from their time in the Royal Air Force, he selected the Bambers from a list of prospective adopters. After finishing school, Sheila attended Secretarial College in Swiss Cottage, London. In 1974, she discovered that she was impregnated by Colin Caffell. June and Neville arranged for an abortion. This was the start of her tumultuous relationship with June. This divide was further exacerbated when June discovered Colin and Sheila sunbathing naked in a field during the summer of that same year. Reportedly, June began referring to Sheila as the Devil's Child. Sheila would go on to continue her studies at the aforementioned Secretarial College, then trained as a hairdresser and worked briefly as a model with the Lucy Clayton Agency, which included 2 months of work in Tokyo, Japan, according to Wikipedia. In May of 1977, Sheila would marry Colin, after discovering that she was once again pregnant with his child. 6 months into the pregnancy, Sheila would miscarry. The Bambers then bought the couple a garden flat in Carlington Road, Hampstead, while Sheila was recovering from her miscarriage. Sheila would go on to suffer another miscarriage before giving birth to Nicholas and Daniel in June of 1979. Just before this, Colin had allegedly began an affair and left Sheila for 5 months after the birth of the twins. With everything that had happened up to this point, this seemed to be the breaking point for Sheila's mental health. She became noticeably and increasingly upset. For example, at her 21st birthday party, Colin had left with another woman. This upset Sheila so much that she would break a window with her fist and had to seek treatment at a hospital. Sheila and Colin would go on to divorce in May of 1982. After divorcing Colin, Neville bought her a flat in Moors Head Mansions in Maida Vale. Colin would help raise the children from his home in Kilburn. At this point, Sheila decided to track down her birth mother, who was living in Canada at that time. They met at the Heathrow Airport for a brief reunion, but were unable to form a relationship. It was at around this time that she also met with a group of young women who would give her the nickname Bambi. This was the same group of young women who would later report that Sheila was desperately insecure and was constantly complaining about her poor relationship with her mother, June. The group would partake in partying and would do illicit substance together while fraternizing with older men. Since Sheila's modeling career had ended after the birth of Nicholas and Daniel, she lived on welfare or would take low-paying jobs to support herself and her children. One example included a brief stint as a waitress at school's diner in London, where her uniform would consist of a school uniform, stockings, and suspenders. She also took on cleaning jobs and at one point participated in a nude photo shoot, which was something that she regretted doing later. Sheila's mental health continued to decline, including episodes where she would bang her head against walls. Then, in 1983, her family doctor referred her to psychiatrist Hugh Ferguson. This was the exact same Hugh Ferguson who had treated her adopted mother in the past. According to Ferguson, Sheila was in an agitated state, paranoid, and psychotic. She was subsequently admitted to St. Andrew's Hospital, which is a private psychiatric facility where she was diagnosed by Hugh Ferguson with a schizoaffective disorder. Ferguson would go on to see Sheila as an outpatient even after she was discharged in September of that same year. It was then that he concluded that his first diagnosis was a mistake. He now believed that she had schizophrenia and prescribed her with an antipsychotic as part of her treatment. According to Dr. Ferguson, Sheila believed that the devil had given her power to project evil onto others. She would refer to Nicholas and Daniel as the devil's children, which was the same phrase that June Bamber had used to describe Sheila earlier in her life. She also allegedly stated that she was capable of taking their lives or that she could get the children to take the lives of others. Although she spoke of taking her own life, Ferguson would later tell the courts that he didn't believe that she was a suicide risk. In March of 1985, 5 months before the tragedy, Sheila was readmitted to St. Andrews after she suffered a psychotic episode where she believed that she was in direct contact with God. She was also certain that people, including her boyfriend, were trying to hurt or even take her life. 4 weeks later, she was discharged, once again, and started receiving monthly injections of haloperidol, which is an antipsychotic with a sedative effect. From this point on, Nicholas and Daniel would live almost exclusively with their father, Colin. According to Jeremy, on the night of the tragedy, the Bamber family had discussed putting the boys into a daytime foster care over dinner. Now, let's talk a little bit about Jeremy Bamber. Jeremy Neville Bamber was born on January 13th of 1961. His biological mother was a student midwife who had had an affair with a married Army sergeant and decided to give her baby to the Church of England Children's Society, the same place that his adoptive sister Sheila was given up for adoption. At 6 months old, Jeremy was adopted by Neville and June Bamber. He was sent to St. Nicholas Primary, then, along with Sheila, to Malden Court Prep School. Then in September of 1970, when Jeremy was only 9 years old, he was sent to Gresham School, which is a boarding school in Holt, Norfolk, where he would become part of the cadet force. Reportedly, due to bullying and other factors, Jeremy wasn't happy at Gresham's. After leaving Gresham's, although he had no qualifications, Jeremy attended a sixth form college, which in the UK and other areas represents the final 2 years of secondary education. In 1978, Neville paid for Jeremy to visit Australia, where he would take scuba diving lessons. From here, he would go on to visit New Zealand. According to Jeremy's friends, while in New Zealand, Jeremy had broken into a jewelry store where he stole an expensive watch. Also, according to Jeremy's friends, he would brag about being involved in the smuggling of narcotics. In 1982, Jeremy would return to England to work on the family farm, earning around £170 per week. At this time, Jeremy would set up residence at 9 Head Street in Goldhanger at a cottage owned by Neville. This cottage sat roughly 3.5 miles from the White House farm. In addition to the cottage, Neville also provided Jeremy with a car that he could use, as well as 8% of the family company, Osea Road Campsites Limited, which ran the caravan site that was previously mentioned. After being interviewed in 2011, journalists from The Guardian would describe Jeremy as clever and strategic. They wrote that there was something about him that made the public unsympathetic toward him. He was handsome in a rather cruel and caddish way and seemed to exude arrogance and indifference. On Sunday, August 4th, 1985, 3 days before the tragic events at the White House farm, Sheila and her twin sons, Nicholas and Daniel, had arrived at the farm to spend some time with June and Neville, as previously discussed. On the evening of June 6, Jeremy also visited the farm. It was during this visit that Jeremy alleged that he heard June and Neville suggest to Sheila that she place the twins in daytime foster care with a local family. He also alleged that Sheila didn't seem to be bothered by this suggestion, only stating that she would rather stay in London. As previously mentioned, the boys had stayed in foster care before, although this was in London and not near the White House farm, and had not appeared to cause a problem for Sheila. At around 9:30 p.m. that evening, a farm worker heard Jeremy leave the farm. At around that same time, Neville had received a call from the farm's secretary, Barbara Wilson, who was left with the impression that she had interrupted an argument, stating that Neville was short with her and seemed to hang up in irritation, which was out of character for Neville. By all accounts, Neville was an even-tempered man. At around 10 p.m. on that evening, June's sister, Pamela Boutfleur, also called and spoke with Sheila, whom she said was quiet, and then she spoke with June, whom she said sounded normal. In the early morning hours of August 7, 1985, Jeremy Bamber made a direct call to the Chelmsford police station as opposed to dialing 999, which is England's emergency number. During this call, he stated that he had received a phone call from his father, Neville, from the landline at White House Farm to the landline at Jeremy's home, telling him that Sheila had gone berserk with a gun. In the middle of the call, the line went dead. After calling the police, Jeremy then called his girlfriend Julie Mugford in London and then drove slowly to the farmhouse. In fact, 3 officers from Witham Station indicated that Jeremy had been driving much more slowly than they had, stating that they passed him on Page's Lane and arrived at the house a minute or two before Jeremy arrived. The group waited outside the house for a tactical firearms unit to arrive. The unit arrived at 5 a.m. but decided to wait until daylight before entering the house. The police had determined that all the doors and windows, with the exception of the window to the main bedroom on the first floor, were shut. Before entering the house, the police spent 2 hours trying to communicate with Sheila using a loudhailer, also known as a bullhorn. The only response that they received was that of the dog barking from inside the house. While waiting outside the house, the police questioned Jeremy, who seemed calm given the circumstances. According to the Court of Appeal, Jeremy told them about the call from his father and stated that it sounded as if someone had cut off the call. Jeremy then told the police that he didn't really get along well with his sister. When asked if she might have gone berserk with a gun, he replied, "I don't really know. She's a nutter. She's been having treatment." Jeremy was also asked why his father would have called him instead of phoning the police. His response to that question was that his father was the sort of person who might want to keep things within the family. Jeremy also told the police that he decided to call the police station instead of 999 because he didn't think it would affect how long the police would take to respond. After this, he would talk to one of the officers about cars in general, stating that the Oseo Road caravan site would be able to stand him a Porsche soon. Jeremy also told police that Sheila was familiar with how to operate a gun, stating that he and Sheila had gone target shooting together. He also indicated that while at the farmhouse earlier, he thought that he had heard rabbits outside and loaded the rifle for this reason. Jeremy then claimed to have left the fully loaded rifle on the kitchen table along with a box of ammo nearby. At 7:54 a.m., the police broke down the back door using a sledgehammer and then entered the home. It was then that they were greeted with the gruesome sight within. They noticed that the door had been locked from inside and found the key still in the lock. They found the bodies of all 5 family members with multiple gunshot wounds. Neville Bamber, age 61, was found in the kitchen. He was dressed in pajamas and was lying over a chair which had been overturned next to the fireplace. There appeared to be signs of a struggle. He'd been shot 8 times, 6 times at close range in the head and face. The other 2 shots hit his body and were fired from about 2 feet away. According to where the empty cartridges had been found, police surmised that he had been shot 4 times upstairs, then somehow managed to go downstairs where the struggle took place. He was hit several times with the rifle before being shot 4 more times fatally. There were 2 shots to Neville's right side and 2 to the top of his head, which most likely would have rendered him unconscious. The left side of his lip had been wounded, his jaw was fractured, and damage had been done to his teeth, neck, and larynx. This is important as the pathologist indicated that this would have prevented him from engaging in purposeful talk. There was also gunshot wounds to his left shoulder and elbow. Both of his eyes were black, his nose was broken, and there was bruising to his cheeks, as well as lacerations to his forehead. There was also bruising found on both of his forearms as well as on his left wrist. The bruises were consistent with Neville having been struck with a long, blunt object, i.e. the gun. Finally, there were 3 circular-type burn marks found on his back. June Bamber, also age 61, was found lying on the floor next to the door of the master bedroom. Her nightdress was heavily blood-stained. She had been shot a total of 7 times. 1 shot was fired at close range and hit her between the eyes. Another shot was found on the right side of her head. These 2 shots would have killed her quickly. There were also shots found on the right side of her lower neck, her right forearm, 2 shots to the right side of her chest, and 1 on her right knee. According to the pattern of blood found on her clothing, it is believed that she had been sitting up during part of the attack. Daniel and Nicholas Caffell, both age 6, were found in their beds in their own room, which formerly belonged to their mother Sheila. They appeared to have been shot while in bed. Daniel had been shot 5 times in the back of the head. 4 of the shots were at close range. Nicholas had been shot 3 times, also at close range. Sheila Caffell, age 28, was found on the floor of the master bedroom alongside her mother. She was in her nightdress. She was shot once in the throat and once under the chin. Both shots were at close range. According to pathologist Peter Venesis, the shot under the chin was the one that ended her life. He stated that the injury to her throat would have ended her life as well, however not straight away. He also indicated that it would be entirely possible for a person with this type of injury to get up and walk around. Given the evidence found at the crime scene, it would appear that Sheila really had gone berserk with a gun. Due to this evidence, the case was initially ruled a murder-suicide. However, after further examination, there were many things that just didn't line up with the murder-suicide theory. For one, how could a woman as small as Sheila overpower her father? If you remember earlier in this discussion, Neville was 6 foot 4 inches tall and in good health. It just seemed highly unlikely that she could have outmatched her father during the struggle and did the extent of damage that was done to him. Also, the magazine of the rifle, a .22 caliber, only held 10 rounds of ammo. The police confirmed that a total of 25 shots were fired, meaning that Sheila would have had to have reloaded the rifle at least twice. This is especially odd as it is alleged that the shooting started upstairs where everybody was asleep and the ammo was located downstairs. This means that she would have had to have fired the first 10 rounds, run downstairs and reload, during which time Neville would have followed her and the struggle ensued, fire 10 more rounds, reload again, then run back upstairs to fire the final 5 rounds. Even given all the evidence that they already had, the police were convinced that this was, in fact, a murder-suicide. In fact, Detective Chief Inspector Thomas Jones was so convinced that Sheila had taken the lives of her family members before taking her own life that he ordered Jeremy's and Sheila's cousins out of his office when they asked him to consider otherwise. On August 8th, the Daily Express reported that a farming family affectionately dubbed the Archers was slaughtered in a bloodbath yesterday. Brandishing a gun taken from her father's collection, deranged divorcee Sheila Bamber, age 28, first shot her twin 6-year-old sons. She gunned down her father as he tried to phone for help. Then she murdered her mother before turning the automatic .22 rifle on herself. Because the police were adamant to believe the murder-suicide theory, the investigation was poorly conducted. The scene of the crime was not secured and searched properly, and evidence wasn't recorded or preserved. In fact, much of the valuable evidence was lost within a couple of days because the police had burned the blood-stained bedding and carpets, apparently to spare Jeremy's feelings. One officer even moved the murder weapon without wearing gloves, which contaminated this crucial piece of evidence, nor was it checked for fingerprints for several weeks. Only 3 days after the crime, the extended family were given back the keys to the house. On August 10th, one of Jeremy Bamber's cousins found a key piece of evidence that further disputed the murder-suicide theory. This was a silencer that appeared to contain flecks of red paint and blood from one of the victims. This piece of evidence was taken to the home of one of the cousins before being turned into the police 3 days later. A few days after that, a scratch was found on the red mantelpiece that was thought to have been caused by the gun during the struggle with Neville Bamber. Additionally, a Bible was found near Sheila Caffel's body, which was not examined at all. According to journalist David Cornett, a hacksaw blade, which may have been used to gain entry into the house, lay in the garden for months. Officers seem to have done a poor job with taking notes. Some of the officers waited weeks before writing down their statements from their interviews with Jeremy. The bodies were released mere days after the crime had taken place. Neville, June, and Sheila were cremated. Also, Jeremy Bamber's clothes were not examined until a month later. 10 years later, all of the blood evidence was destroyed. On September 7, 1985, 1 month after the tragedy at the White House farm occurred, Jeremy Bamber's girlfriend, Julie Mugford, would provide the police with a statement that would totally change the course of the investigation into the murders of the Bambers and the Caffels. Jeremy and Julie started dating in 1983 when Julie was 19 years old. At this time, she was studying for a degree at Goldsmiths College in London. She had taken a holiday job at Sloppy Joe's Pizzeria in Colchester, where Jeremy also worked at the bar. During her interviews with police, Julie would admit to her background in dishonesty. In 1985, Julie had been cautioned for using a friend's checkbook after it had been reported stolen to purchase goods worth around £700. Herself and her friend had repaid that money back to the bank. She also admitted to helping Jeremy rob the Osea Road caravan site, which was owned by Jeremy's parents, of just under £1,000 in March of 1985. She reported that Jeremy had staged a break-in to make it appear as though strangers had perpetrated the robbery. Julie was initially supportive of Jeremy in the aftermath of the murders. Pictures of Jeremy weeping and holding onto Julie's arm had been circulated throughout the media. During her initial interviews with police, she stated that Jeremy called her at home on August 7th between 3 and 3:30 a.m., telling her that there was something wrong at home and that he sounded genuinely worried. She went on to explain that because she was tired, she did not ask him what was wrong. After a series of fights which subsequently led to Jeremy breaking off his relationship with Julie, Julie would change those statements. She admitted to telling Jeremy that he was a psychopath and proceeded to try to smother him with a pillow. She also stated that Jeremy had contacted another woman in Julie's presence, which led to Julie breaking a mirror and then slapping Jeremy, after which Jeremy had twisted Julie's arm behind her back. This series of events occurred 3 days before Julie went to the police to change her statements. According to Julie, between March and October of 1984, Jeremy said that he wished that he could get rid of them all. He would complain about his old father and mad mother trying to run his life. He went on to say that his sister Sheila had nothing to live for and that the twins were disturbed. He also seemed bitter that his parents were paying for Sheila to live in the expensive flat in Maida Vale. Jeremy had allegedly discussed sedating his parents with sleeping pills and shooting them, then setting the fire to the farmhouse. She dismissed his ramblings as idle talk. He would go on to tell her that Sheila would make a good scapegoat. Julie then alleged that he had discussed cycling along the back roads to the house, entering through a kitchen window which had a broken catch, then leaving through a different window that he could latch from the outside when he was finished. Then he indicated that a call would be made from the farmhouse to his house because the last call made would be recorded. She also alleged that Jeremy claimed to have killed rats with his bare hands to see whether or not he was able to kill, but stated that it had taught him that he would not be able to kill his family, even though he still continued to talk about it. Julie would then go on to talk about how she had spent the weekend before the murders with Jeremy at his cottage in Goldhanger, at which point he had dyed his hair black. She stated that she had seen his mother's bicycle there also. Julie then told police that she received a call from Jeremy at 9:56 p.m. stating that he'd been thinking about committing the crime all day and that he was pissed off. He then told her, "It's tonight or never." Later, when she received the call from Jeremy between 3 a.m. and 3:30 a.m., it was to tell her that everything is going well, something is wrong at the farm, I haven't had any sleep all night, bye honey, and I love you lots. Julie's flatmates would later state that the call had come in closer to 3 a.m. Later in the morning, Jeremy called Julie again stating that Sheila had gone mad and that a police car was coming to pick her up. When she arrived with the police at Jeremy's cottage, she alleged that Jeremy had pulled her aside and said, "I should have been an actor." Later, on the evening of August 7th, Julie asked Jeremy if he had been the one to do it. However, he said no, then alleged that a friend of his had carried out the crime for him. He told the friend how to enter and exit the farmhouse without being detected. He also allegedly instructed his friend to call him from one of the phones within the farmhouse that had a memory redial function to help him provide an alibi. He then told Julie that everything had gone as planned with one exception. Neville had put up a fight, which made his friend angry. He then stated that this friend shot Neville 7 times. According to Julie, Jeremy then told her that his friend stated that Sheila was the last to die. He instructed her to lie down and shoot herself last. After doing so, this friend put a Bible on her chest to make it appear as though Sheila perpetrated the crimes in a religious frenzy. He also stated that the children were shot in their sleep. Julie then indicated that Jeremy claimed to have paid his friend £2,000 to commit the heinous crime. Because of her statements, the Assistant Director of Public Prosecutions, who prepared the case against Jeremy, sent out a letter dated September 26, 1985, requesting that Julie essentially be granted immunity from her crimes, including the check fraud and the burglary of the caravan. As a result of Julie's statements, Jeremy Bamber would be arrested on September 8, 1985, and was charged with 5 counts of murder. Julie was a key witness in the trial. The prosecution also used the fact that Sheila could not have possibly overpowered her father during the struggle for the gun as part of his argument. Also used as evidence was the silencer for the rifle. Since it had the paint flecks and blood evidence on it, it was argued that Sheila would not have been able to shoot herself with the silencer attached. The prosecution argued that upon realizing this, Jeremy removed the silencer and put it in the cupboard to make the murder-suicide theory seem more plausible. The prosecution would also argue that, due to the extent of his injuries, Neville Bamber would not have been able to make a phone call that Jeremy alleged that he had made to him, which implicated Sheila as the culprit. The bicycle that belonged to June Bamber was seen at Jeremy Bamber's cottage by Julie Mugford, was the method of transportation that Jeremy had used to reach the farmhouse to prevent his car from being seen. On October 28, 1985, the jury deliberated for more than 9 hours. They subsequently found Jeremy Bamber guilty on all 5 counts by a 10-2 majority. He was initially sentenced to 5 life terms with a minimum of 25 years served. The judge told him, "Your conduct in planning and carrying out the killing of 5 members of your family was evil, almost beyond belief." In December of 1994, his sentence was changed to a whole life order, which is the equivalent of life without parole. Jeremy Bamber continues to proclaim his innocence to this day. Thank you for taking the time to explore this case with us. Even though Jeremy Bamber was found guilty on all counts, there are still plenty of people who support Jeremy and believe that he is innocent. Was this crime committed by Sheila, who was mentally ill at the time of her death? Or was it committed by Jeremy with the hopes of gaining access to his parents' estate? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. Until next time.